Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Once again, this is Marshall H. Sanders, back to you on the White Matrix series. For those who have not checked out the series so far to this point, please check out the beginning of the series to understand and follow along so you understand how we've gotten to this point in the first place. Now, this video is a very unscheduled video. I had not intended to do this. However, I've gotten so many comments and other things regarding this that I want you all to understand some things that really hopefully will clear up a lot of amazing ignorance with many, and some just straight out racist or just plain not common sense or out of context in history. Now, if you study history, ladies and gentlemen, you should always study it as a person that's thinking like in a courtroom. And you want to view, as a juror, you want to view all the evidence to make a determination. So you're going to have the prosecutor and you're going to have also the defendant present cases. You do not make a determination after either one makes a argument on their points. You listen to both. And that is what I hope all of you will do before coming to a determination on anything I've said or anything that I've proven very much to you. I want you to come to a determination of this by the preponderance of the facts. Okay? But you have to get all the information to make that determination. So I'm gonna separate some really ridiculous fallacies. Okay? Number one, there were two ruling classes in terms of governments in the United States. One ruled until 1775, which we are aware of during the Revolutionary War, when the colonists took over their own nation, in which they then formed a government in 1788, 12 years later, putting something together called the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, understand that anything that preceded 1775, though the colonists had a paper government, that government was always superseded by the real government, the legal authorities of England. So when you say there's any law, all law before 1775 was by England law. This is very important to understand the slave reparations that I've mentioned before. But I want to clarify some things for you. Now, so I'm going to walk you through this. So I want you to follow very closely on this because people have been generalizing expressions and thinking without understanding what they're saying. When you take it out of context, you really do not have an answer, and you can really find yourself making really stupid statements. Now, there's a rather important case that happened under British rule in the 1600s. There was a black slave owner by the name of Anthony Johnson. Now, understand, slavery had pretty much started around 1607 or somewhere thereabout of black slavery. Indentured servants are not slaves. I'm going to repeat that for you. When you hear indentured servants, that is not a slave. They're entirely different things. And I'm going to define it very easy for you. A slave is a person who's 100% under the compulsion, under someone else's rule. Period. They have no rights. Okay? None. Okay? Any leniency or anything else, that is simply a privilege to the discretion of the property owner or the slave owner. An indentured servant was a person who had a contract. Okay, let's say if you're an Irish indentured servant, and there were by far more, almost exclusively, almost in some ways, um, Irish and very poor children from England that were indentured servants in America. And what an indentured servant looked like is pretty much what we have, frankly, what we have in our employment system right now. You are hired under a contract, just as we're pretty much hired under a contract to work, and we have certain rules. Otherwise, we're fired, and we may not even receive our severance pay, right? We may not even receive our wages in some cases. Well, that's basically what we are. So we're indentured servants even to this day. Well, we think it's employment. It's just a cute way of saying indentured servant. So understand there's a big difference between being 100% an authority of someone and being a employee, a contractual employee. Let's put it that way. How about we put that to the American understanding of today? But I digress. Now, Anthony Johnson, what he had did was Anthony Johnson had gone to court under British law, remember, and he was African American who had an indentured servant who wanted to be freed from that contract. And Anthony Johnson won the case under British law, saying that he wanted to keep the indentured servant under that indentured servant contract forever. And the indentured servant said, he wanted to be out of the contract and to be hired to someone else. That servant, of course, was white. Now, so we're going to come to the issue of slave owners, because one of the main questions I had was, well, do you know that blacks own slaves also? It's a it's an interesting dynamic that you must put in context and understand. And I'm going to help you do that. So, because I'm arguing for even these slaves to receive reparations. So I'm going to present my case to you, but I want you to be understanding. This is the defense, if you will, of why they have a case that should be submitted, if you will allow. Now, listen to this. So, black slave owners made up, and again, we're talking, they call them slaves, but I'm going to break down that most of them were not slaves. Okay? Or if you want to call them slaves, it's going to be a different type of slaves. We're going to call them non-compulsive slaves. Okay? Non-compulsive slaves. There was two different categories. Okay? Now, there were up to, we don't know exactly how many, because states were different, and states had something called state laws, which they have even to today. If you go to Delaware, I live in Maryland, we have state taxes, we have sales taxes. You go to Delaware, which is one state over, and they do not have sales taxes. So different states had different rules. However, majority of the states, including Maryland, which is the richest state during the slavery aspect for most of the time, most of these states had laws which forbid a slave or black from being not a slave, right? You could either not a slave, or a black could not buy the freedom of a slave. Let me give you an example. And this I can give you some names later if you want, but I'm going to give you some examples of a real situation that happened that reoccurred a lot. A woman had she was a free woman. Okay, understand that just because you're free doesn't mean that you shouldn't be employed. Doesn't mean that you weren't looking for your own land, and if you bought land, that you didn't need labor for the land. This is common sense. It's not that blacks, once they got their freedom, wanted to go around and go, "Hey, I'm free. I'm free. What do you do for a living? I nothing at all. I'm free. How do you make your money? I'm free." That's ridiculous. That was a first step, not a ending. Okay? Now, so this woman in particular that I'm speaking about, she had a farm. She needed labor. So what she did, she went and she was she wanted to free the slaves, but again, state laws did not allow a person to be freed then. So what she had to do was to buy a guy who eventually became her husband. Now, I want you to put this in absolute perspective. You're limited on your options here as a black. First of all, there were many blacks, even though they were free, that were also paid by the federal government the slave owners were able to come and just pick them up, even if they were free, even if they had their papers. So you were always in danger no matter what. And the only way to establish your legal right to be free was kind of circulating that you had an importance to that particular county economically. Just think this through, okay? So what they would do is they would need farms. They would need ways of producing food, and of course, with these people having been forced to work most of the time on these farms, they knew the cotton business more than the master did or anyone else. So who better to start their own business having gone through that than the freed slave? Common sense, right? But most of this is people's opinions and so-called facts outrule common sense. And so it becomes really stupid. But I digress again. So what happened was basically these people actually went back, this woman went back, got this guy she bought and paid for, this slave. She brings him back and she marries him. Now, she actually had him working on the farm. How does this not make sense? The husband now has an interest in this business. He is what we can call a non-compulsive slave. Okay? Or at least in this case, at this point. Because his slavery now, that's a lot better, if you want to call it slavery, is more indentured servitude at this point, because she's not beating him up. She's not beating him for the sake of it or working him for the sake of working him. She's working him for the sake of the family and herself acquiring stability in a country that hates her and a system that is made against her. This is context. So what she did was, there were times when other slave owners needed a slave. They needed some workers. So to make money, she would say, honey, just like we would do today, right? Your husband and you are trying to put something together. And what happens? You do what? Your husband is not bringing enough money. You say, honey, go cut the neighbor's grass down the street. I mean, you get a second job so we can keep the money going. And that's what she did. So there were times when she lent out, and this is a recurring theme. She lent out her slave to other slave owners. Certain times of the year, certain times they needed slave labor, if you want to call it that. They would hire this person out, which means that the family household would maximize. Now, in this case, which is kind of interesting, the husband and the wife got into an accident. Got into an argument. And so the wife was really pissed, right? For whatever reason. Maybe the husband felt effeminated. And let me tell you, as a man, I think there would have been all kind of arguments with me and my wife at that point. Because it's like, hey, you're free, but you're only free because the state laws doesn't allow me to be free. And I should be head of this household, or at least equal with you on this household. But the woman, for whatever reason, was very angry, and she got so angry that she sold her husband to a slave owner. Now, understand something. The slave owner was a good slave owner in terms of not abusing. He wanted this husband for actual labor and was not there to beat him and did not have a hatred towards black, apparently. So, but the woman, once she came to herself, realized that she had more than likely been the culprit and she had been wrong, and she missed her husband. So what she did, of course, was she went back to the slave owner and tried to purchase her husband back, apologizing that she had gotten so angry, she had made such a rash mistake. But the other slave owner refused to sell back her husband. Now that is a famous case that happened many years ago, but I'm putting that as a contextual thing. When you talk about slaves, it's not that the slaves were not slaves. And it's not that some slaves would have been what we call free people, except for states did not allow for these people to be freed. So you had to free them in a different way. Now, of the 6 to 8% projected that black slave owners were, if you want to call them that, well over 90%, or somewhere there. Well, I'm sorry. Let me digress on that. I apologize. Let me clarify it. Well over 80%, and a possibility of over 90%, did not have slaves that were not already non-compulsive slaves. That meant that most free blacks basically purchased a family member or family members, multiple family members, out of the slavery and made them slaves to the household, but they worked the farms as a family. That's just how it was. And so when you don't have the context that there was no other opportunity to free these people, which of course was the priority. I mean, understand something. Blacks have never gotten along just like whites have never gone along. And it is utterly the most ridiculousness of standard to try to make blacks like a one person and say blacks can't sin. They go against each other. Now let me give you a stat here. People talk about black on black crime. I'm just give you an example. People talk about black on black crime, and they'll say, well, 90.1% of crime against blacks are done by blacks. And according to the FBI statistics, that's about correct. Let's not dispute that. Let's give you more context, though. 83% of crime of whites is done by whites. Isn't that interesting? So 90% is somehow, okay, well, see, y'all have an epidemic, but 83% is not considered an epidemic. And all of it can be explained by the demographics understanding that that most crime is done by somebody they know and very close to their home, within a mile or two of their home. So obviously, because of the segregational ways sometimes in our country, most whites live by whites and associate with whites, and most blacks associate and live by blacks. Therefore, it's not a race problem on either side. It's a crime problem. But when you exclude information, you become an absolute fool and just a person who just want to make up the things that you want to hear. It's that juror who's only going to listen to the prosecutor make up a story with no evidence, but going to believe them and not listen to the defense. That's exactly what it is. So now, so those people were non-compulsive once they were put into certain situations, of course, when they were purchased by their family members. But of course, before then, they were not. It's a very simple thing. Now, there were some very, very small exceptions that were purchased from Africa. In other words, the slave owners basically said, "Hey, we're we're coming from Africa. Do you want a slave?" And the person says, "Yes, I want the slave." As soon as they land on this rock here, and they purchased them. Again, to think that all blacks are supposed to regard all blacks as if all blacks are from the same country, as if the Ghanese didn't hate the Nigerians, as if the Nigerians didn't hate the Ugandans or whatever. It is the equivalent of England, Spain, and France warring over this language country and also abroad. You had 2 world wars of white countries warring against each other for the most part. You had the Revolutionary War of whites warring against each other. You had the Civil War of whites warring against each other. Family members, literal family members, fighting and killing each other over the politics of this land. But if blacks just have a little disagreement, if get a few blacks who put their people in chains, and what happens? Oh, there were blacks over, so that means that slave owners were all slave owners. It's deception, it's ignorance, and sometimes it's just plain out racist and lies. It's demonic. And so that's why I wanted to make this video. I wanted to explain these differences so that you, the people who are listening to this video, understand the difference between these things and who I'm speaking about. Because yes, there are certain things, and I always encourage every single one of you to comment, like, subscribe, talk to me. There may be some things that you say, hey, Marshall, you forgot to mention. Absolutely. These are very short videos, and I would love nothing more than mention. I would like to go 20 straight hours, because I could talk 20 straight hours, perhaps, on the intricacies of history, on the intricacies of just slavery and black relationships in this country. But I can't get it all in one location. Please understand, I'm trying to get in as much information in a small, compact time period, which is why I'm breaking up these videos in 40 minutes or so segments, or less segments, so that people can understand where am I going with these things, and so you won't get distracted on other things, because you can, hey, I may be boring to some of you, I don't know, but I'm trying to get this information out to you so we learn to break down things and stop generalizing things. Get the information, get all of the information, and then you make the determination on that. Whatever answer you come up with, I'm going to be fine with, as long as you're backing it up with the actual information that's been presented, as well as information that you yourself have sought out and learned. So yes, I am asking for slave reparations for those non-compulsive as well as the compulsed slaves in this country, because the slave labor is still the slave labor. Now, I've said this before, but many of you probably have not seen the video before this. But so for those who have not, I'm going to say it again. I'm not asking for all blacks to receive reparations. Not even, no, just not. I repeat, I'm asking for the descendants of the black slaves in America, the black slaves in America, to receive reparations. That's it. As well as, I should say, the slavery that continued on and continued to this day under such laws of the Vagrancy Laws, which literally was slavery, ladies and gentlemen. If you do not know about the black codes or the Vagrancy Laws, you have zero idea. If you think slavery ended in 1865, I'm very sorry for you. It continued for 100 years plus more in America, just under a different name. And of course, the black slaves, and then of course the last one which I talked about was things like the Black Wall Street and other black ventures. Black Wall Street, being in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, was bombed. It was one of the biggest, highest economical places in all of this country, and therefore in the world. And blacks built it up out of their own ingenuity, despite all the racism and all the other things that they had to go through. They built it up. And in one day, I believe 1 to 3 days, whites, the government, think about this, bombed them, killing 500, injuring 800, and destroyed their businesses. No reparations. They deserve reparations. ladies and gentlemen. Everyone who has been a victim in the criminal justice system deserves their day in court. And they deserve the judgment, the summary judgment of justice first. That's the number one. If no money, anything's ever exchanged hands, justice first. Justice. And secondly, financial restitution. And third, reparations, repairing the situation, which include financial considerations, but it's another story. I'm not going to get into the fine prints of those two semantics. That is why I made this video. I wanted people to understand that. And I'm going to continue with this series. I'm almost finished because what I want people to understand, my next video is going to be on the corporations that benefited from slavery. Because I know the next question people are asking, how exactly pay for this? And I've mentioned many times how the government owes. But I don't just mean the U.S. government. Starting to see something now? Not only do I not mean the U.S. government paying reparations, just like we give reparations, if you want to call them that, it's really, they call it a loan, yearly loan of $3.8 billion to Israelites, even though we did not have a concentration camp here for Israelites here during World War II. And yet, you can give $3.8 of the taxpayers, many of them black, to a country who we not done any wrong to, but you can't give it to those who you acknowledge you've done wrong to. Come on, man. But I'm going to show how governments, plural, and corporations, plural, are people who should be part of paying into the reparations of people of color. Until then, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Until you all, whether you love me or hate me, I wish you peace. I wish you shalom. Because it's easy to run around telling people to put masks on, or, it's easy to run around telling people that they are harming you in some way. But it's hard, but most rewarding, to look past them and say, but you're still a human being who I wish the best for. And so to those who like, hate, or otherwise, I do wish you peace. Shalom.